friends, you're listening to the Whole Potato Podcast with Krystian Caywood. This podcast was created to encourage, equip, and empower caregivers, friends, and families in the disability community. My hope is that this is a safe place to feel seen, loved, and encouraged as you love God and people with disabilities. So grab a coffee, tune out the world around you, and come be encouraged to be all in for Christ. I'm so glad you're here. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Whole Potato Podcast, a place for parents, guardians, siblings, and friends of those with disabilities to be encouraged and equipped as you love God and you love your friends or family with disabilities. Today, I have family on the podcast. This is my dad. So one of the reasons that I have loved the disability community is because I saw love for the disability community growing up. And my dad is the executive director of AbilityPoint. I'll let him share a little bit about himself. But hello, Kevin. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. I finally got invited on.
Well, I had to keep you humble. You could not be my first guest.
I appreciate that. No, for those that don't know, I'm Kevin Fish, as she said, with AbilityPoint, and I've been the executive director here for 20 years. I've been with the organization since 1996. So, spent a majority of my life, quite honestly, as a part of the organization. But we serve both youth and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities through a whole variety of programs and activities. But our mission has always been trying to help connect our folks with the community, help them to live the fullest life they possibly can and the best quality of life. And so been blessed to be a part of the organization and getting to touch so many different lives over the years.
That's awesome. And so can you kind of talk, I don't think I actually gave you preparation on this one, but can you talk like what made you want to go into this profession? Like where did your love for people with disabilities start?
Yeah. I remember as a young child, quite honestly, again, we had kids with special needs in our school, and I saw some being teased sometimes, didn't really have a lot of real direct experience. The special education kids, they had their own hall, their own classrooms. They just didn't interact with us. And so didn't really grow up necessarily with a connection, but more of a heart for why are they not a part of what we're doing? Why is there that separation? In high school, I got invited to be a lifeguard for Special Olympic swim meet. And so that was my first real experience in and being around something like Special Olympics and seeing the excitement and the energy, and them cheering for each other and stuff. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. I had a number of interactions through school and getting to do some stuff with some of the special education kids just as part of the school community, but not an extensive amount. When I went off to college, I was kind of thinking about teaching and being a coach. And as I did a number of assessments, as you do going to college, and while there, a lot of things kept coming back about getting into social services. And my advisor taught in that area and was like, you would be fantastic at this. This is something that you really seem to have a heart for, whether you know it or not. And so started taking a few classes and then was kind of looking at doing some stuff related to transition, being a transition coordinator, again, allowing to kind of be a part of the schools and that sort of thing. And then about that time, I'm getting married and my wife comes across this position to be a youth coordinator. And so an organization wanting to grow and develop some of their youth programs, obviously it was a bit of a passion for me. And so that was one of the places where I really then early on connected with this organization.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I remember, I was telling someone the other day, like, I don't remember a time not having people with disabilities in my life. And like, for me, it was so normal to have friends who went to the programs that you were running. I was at those programs, I was hanging out with dad and hanging out with my pals. And I'm very, very thankful that I actually have never known a world without friends with disabilities. And I mean, there's so many people who can't say the same thing. And I think it's cool that you just said yes to something and it changed everything for you, and I try to get friends and people to be part of my things all the time. And sometimes they'll say, oh, I don't have experience. I'm like, well, I'm about to give you some. So today I kind of want to talk kind of life after high school and adulthood for someone with an intellectual or developmental disability. As I was preparing to leave high school, I was looking at colleges, thinking about what my career choices would be. And I've talked to quite a few parents who are kind of starting to think about that for their child, or a transition coordinator has kind of started that conversation. And some just don't even know what that looks like. What are the options um, that someone with an intellectual or developmental disability could go into once they cross that high school graduation?
It's one of those things, and we encourage families start this process early. And like you said, it really is a natural part of life. We all transition out of school at some point in time, but there are a lot of things you really do have to plan for, and sometimes people are caught off guard by that, because when you started considering what you're going to do after college or after high school, you were in high school. I mean, it wasn't something you were thinking about at age 8 necessarily, about where I'm going to go to school, what I'm going to do. But the reality is, with waiting lists to get into services and that sort of thing, and the supports that are available for families, they need to start very early. One of the things we always tell people is your whole life is full of transitions. That is natural. Every one of us goes through it, personally and as parents. You go from your infant stage, your toddler stage, your baby proofing. Now you're looking at what you're going to do for preschool, for school. There's all these transitions that are just a natural part of life. But when you have a child with special needs, there's just some special things you need to take into account, because things don't just happen the same way. And so pulling those supports together are so crucial. One of the things we've been pushing for a number of years is we've got this checklist for families to go through that just helps kind of walk through those phases. Because one of the things, if you can apply through your local CDDO, a community developmental disability organization, you can get a case manager who will be with you through all of these transitions. And it's one of the things we really encourage, because if you have somebody who knows and understands all these different phases, they can help guide you, they can answer questions, and they can be an advocate. When you go in for an IEP meeting and you have this educational plan, to have a case manager come and be a part of that with you, they can learn a little bit more about the needs, but also they have somebody who can then help advocate and say, no, this is what the family really feels is best for their kid. Let's make sure we're staying on that path. And so all of these pieces are important, because when you do start getting ready to move out of school, it's a whole different world.
Yeah.
The school system is really kind of set up to provide a lot of supports and therapies, to do a lot of things to manage what happens in the school day. But once you graduate, those pieces aren't in place. Yes, there is a system out there, there's an IDD community, but you don't just walk into it. You have to have all of these things lined up in advance. And knowing that, at an early age, not only can you apply for the CDDO, but you can apply things like Medicaid. Depending on your financial situation as a family, that would help pay for a variety of supports and services that you may need. It gets you into that network that, if, again, you need supports during the summer, that you would have family support dollars, or these Medicaid funds that would help to pay for some of that, to help offer those supports. And so all of these pieces are in place, because then when you get to that point where you're starting to transition out, your case manager can work with you on doing some tours, because there is a whole host of agencies in our community. And we're very blessed here in Sedgwick County to have so many different providers, and so many different types of providers that offer a varied amount of different activities and programs. And the wonderful thing is, you can shop around and look at them, and you can go and try them out. And at some point you want to make a change, again, you can make that change.
Mhm.
But, when you graduate, there's everything from looking at employment. Community employment is one of the things we've really been advocating and pushing for over the years. And we're seeing more and more doors open. And for those who have an interest and a passion there, we want to make sure that they are ready for that step, so that they can get out there and they can find. And it's not a world where you have to push a cart or you have to wash dishes. We have people who are doing some amazing things in the community, that are doing important roles in a lot of businesses and organizations, working as a receptionist or in the mailroom. We got people down at the courthouse who are helping to file all your tags. We've got people who have a drive and an interest to really be a part, and they're proud of the jobs that they have. So that community employment aspect is really important. And again, you don't have to have a case manager to necessarily start that process, but it is sure nice to have somebody who can lead you to it and help you in answering the questions you need to. So you can go to rehab, vocational rehabilitation through the state, and you can get a job coach. There's a number of great job coaches here in the community. I know on the podcast recently, we had Jason Crippa with What's Next, and he's doing a phenomenal job with a lot of our Yes grads.
Yeah.
And they just absolutely love it. And they're just doing some tremendous things in the community. And it's a heart and it's a passion, and it's a group that really is thrilled to have an opportunity to work in the community. Now, not everybody is ready to work in the community. There are some, again, when they graduate, a lot of them have never had any work experience. Some schools try to do that, but even after the pandemic, it's been really hard to get back in. Due to financial cuts for some of the schools, they've really struggled with being able to get out and do what they did before. And so some people aren't quite ready for that yet, and they need some additionals. And so there's a number of agencies who have day programs that offer some real work experience. And so there's some that have some contract jobs, and they're doing projects that then go off to Spirit or to Textron. They've got some that do recycling of computers and TVs. And so lots of interesting hands-on type work. There's some that make filters that are sold all over the state, air filters for businesses, make notebooks, all kinds of really neat projects. And again, in these settings, they're learning some of these work skills. They've got a support person that's there all the time to help them learn how to do those jobs and just to be able to understand what a work day is like. Now, ultimately, the goal should be that they find employment in the community, that this is a step towards community employment. Now, there's some that they feel a whole lot more comfortable in that environment. And so they prefer to be in that setting. They're comfortable with the people they're working with, their coworkers, their boss's understanding. In that environment, if you have a day where you're just really struggling and not able to get anything done, you can come back the next day. If you fall asleep at work or you don't show up, you still have a job the next day. And that's not the case necessarily in the community. And so for those who need that level of support, it is great. And then there's some that are just a leisure day program where it's not necessarily employment, but for someone, again, who is looking for something a little bit different. And so there's a variety of these leisure programs in the community. And sometimes it's for those who can't work for whatever reason, don't feel like they have the ability, or that is not their drive, and trying to force them to work right now just doesn't make a lot of sense, but they still need a level of support daily and interaction. And socialization is so important. Building relationships, having friendships. Something I saw a few years ago that said loneliness kills more people in a year than smoking. Mm. And that's quite a statistic when you think about it, because we hear a lot about how dangerous cigarettes are and smoking is to your life. But the reality is feeling disconnected, feeling lonely, being depressed can be huge. So having a program that you can connect your child to is so important. But if you don't start that process early with the CDDO, all of a sudden your child graduates and they spend the next 5-10 years waiting on a waiting list, sitting on a couch. The skills that they learned at school, they're starting to lose. The motivation to do things, they start to lose. And again, they get depressed, and it really impacts a quality of life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a good point, because going back to when you were talking about what education looks like, I think you get a village. They say it takes a village to raise a child, and you have a village. One of my best friends, her son went into kindergarten this year, and she was talking to me about just not realizing how many other people besides the teacher are all of a sudden involved in your child's life. And it was like, oh yeah, they'll test your hearing, and they'll test this, and there's all these supports, and just all the people that are involved, and you kind of naturally have that. But yeah, then you kind of walk across the graduation stage, and that village isn't just naturally there. And I think targeted case managers are such a good village to have, and is a serious resource. And even just other, making sure that you're making friends with other parents who have children with disabilities, and getting involved in some of the programs, being part of the mini tours, Yes Camp. There's so many other agencies too that do good things, that can make it easier even throughout childhood, but then also that transition then doesn't feel as rough. So funding is something that I think can be really daunting and like confusing. So when you're talking about funding from the state, what does that look like? If someone has never done that before and they're interested, what is the first step to potentially getting funding? And when we talk about funding, we're talking about the state providing money for certain types of programs and services through agencies in Kansas. So what does that look like to start?
Correct. So most all of it is paid through Medicaid. So again, if you are under the age of 18, it goes based on the family income, and so that's something to kind of consider. That not everybody gets that necessarily early on, but you can still apply for it, and we'd encourage people to do that because there are some who can receive it, and it be that ongoing benefit that is so important. The next aspect would be, again, we talked about applying through the CDDO and starting with that process, because what you want to do is get it on the waiting list essentially for home and community based services. So when we're talking about what that funding is, so home and community based is what it sounds, whether it's in-home supports or getting into a day residential type provider that can provide those ongoing services. And so there's a whole myriad of supports that are there, from those day programs we talked about, residential supports that you could have, some in-home supports, some therapies. And so all of these things are really important as wraparound services for somebody to, again, have a quality of life. But then also with that, it would be paid through the state. You would basically have that, and it goes towards what's considered the staffing portion. So it pays for the staff at your agency. It pays, whether it's day or residential. So sometimes there's additional costs because if they're living in a residential setting, they're probably needing to pay for transportation, food. There's additional costs that still come in those settings. So it is not covering absolutely everything in that setting. But, it is, again, that essential thing. And one of the things that, the state, as part of the Constitution, is to care for people with disabilities. And 70 years ago, that was having somebody live in an institution. And now we are community based, and we are really focused on trying to make sure people are living as independently as they can, whatever that is. So with those funds, again, you encourage families to apply early. There's a waiting list of 4,800 individuals in the state of Kansas. So there's a lot of people who are still waiting for services. And right now that waiting list looks to be about 8.5 years long, which is scary, but it is far better than it was a year ago. Our legislature has really worked hard, and we greatly appreciate it. They took 10% of the people off the waiting list this year, which was huge. They capped that list at 48, so it'll never grow beyond that again, which is amazing. And with that, they were able to move a lot of people into the system. That being said, now the system has to have the capacity to serve 500 more people. And so with that, we're doing a lot of advocacy around that as an organization, but we want to make sure that, again, if somebody needs or wants a day program, that they can get into it. If they need or want to have some residential supports. And then it's all about choice. And that's, again, something we've advocated forever, that if your dream is to live in the community, we want you to have that opportunity and to live as independently as possible and to feel like you have the same choices and options as every other person. And then, if you choose that you want to live at home, you shouldn't have to go to a residential provider. That if you are thrilled to be in your home and it's a great situation for your family, that should still be an option for as long as it works. For some families, they're kind of like, well, I don't expect him ever to move out, so I'm not going to bother to apply for services because I don't need that. But the reality is life changes. And all of a sudden, you or your spouse get sick, or somebody passes away, or there's some other dynamic. Maybe you become a caretaker for your aging parent or something. And all of a sudden, there's a different dynamic there, and you want and really need some additional supports. Or your child just decides, I don't want to live with mom and dad anymore. I want to move out. And one of the things sometimes people forget is everybody that we love that has a developmental disability really has the same heart, passion, and interest as the rest of us. And no one truly wants to live at home with their parents forever. That's a natural passage of life. Now, it may take till they're 30, before they get to that point that they feel like they have that need. It may not happen at the same point. But for a lot of our folks, they're seeing what others their age are doing, and they're kind of like, well, hey, I want to have a relationship. I want to work in the community. I want to do these things. And we want to make sure that that's available when that comes.
So I want to take a second and talk to the parents who might be feeling overwhelmed or maybe feeling like, oh man, am I behind? Have I missed out on opportunities for my child? I know this all feels crazy. I know this all feels like a lot. But I think the main point, and Kevin, I think you would agree on this, is you can start now. And so, maybe your child is older and you're going, I didn't know that I needed to be thinking about this or to go get a case manager when they were much younger. And the reality is, it's going to be okay and you can start today. There are wait lists. There may be some things that will have to be worked around or kind of things you'll have to figure out until you get off that wait list if that's something that you're needing. But don't feel like you've messed up or that it's all just downhill from here. I think this is an important conversation to have because we want families to know about opportunities, and there's so many now. And sometimes that's exciting, and sometimes it feels overwhelming to realize that actually especially in like the Wichita area, there is a lot of different things that a person with disabilities could do. And so this is why we're having this conversation, is to make sure you know about them and you feel empowered to be looking at them. And, I think of so many of my friends. I mean, I have friends with jobs who are in sheltered workshop situations, who are in group homes or independent living. Some are in their own apartment. I mean, it's a variety of different situations that my friends are in based on what their needs were, what they wanted. And I think that's really neat. Sometimes I think people assume that after high school, it's like to a residential home you go, and that's not necessarily the case. And I think it's great that that's not the case. And I think it's, some of my girls love their residential home because they're living with 5 of their friends and they're having a blast. So you mentioned earlier the transition checklist. Is this something that parents can get a hold of? Is it online, or is it even something that maybe I can link in show notes to provide for families? Where can you find that?
Yeah, so we are part of the Transition Council of South Central Kansas. And so if you Google that, Transition Council of South Central Kansas, we've got a website, and on there, on that homepage, is the checklist. And I would encourage every family, even if you're already graduated, to print this off. So when we created this, we did break it down by age group. So elementary, middle, high school, and those transitioning out of school. And on every page, it walks through several of the things we talked about today: applying for the CDDO, getting a case manager, applying for Medicaid services, but then talking about things like finding area support groups, reaching out to providers like Families Together for support in schools with IEPs, looking into other social and recreational activities. So it is so important to build that network, because not only is it great for your kid to be active in Special Olympics or attending Yes Camp or any of these things, but for the parents to find that network, because that parent network is so important to be able to walk through life with people who are walking the same walk, and also connecting with families who are a little bit older. I always wish we had more of our families involved with some of our family night activities, because that is so important to have that network. Because here are people who are living that same life, and that is so crucial. When you apply for these services, you may be on a waiting list, but you get case management right away. So you have somebody, again, even while you're waiting on a waiting list, because though you don't have access to certain services, there are a lot of things in our community you can still participate in and that they can help connect you with. So again, you want to make sure that you're taking advantage of those things. So this checklist, like I said, it basically walks through different stages of life. But even when you get to that last one, and let's say you're 30 years old, there's a lot of things on that list that still apply, because you still need to be active in social things. You still need to make sure you've applied, because as you mentioned, waiting longer because you waited this long doesn't make it any better. You got to start at some point, and this is it. Say, hey, I want to take these steps. And one of the reasons we made this checklist, in a sense, is you can stick it on your refrigerator, because we know day-to-day life is challenging, and you are just putting out the fires. You're just trying to do your best to take care of your child as a parent, and you can't always make that call right away. But to have something that you can come back to that just reminds you, here is a resource that I should be taking advantage of. Oh, I haven't checked that box off. Let me take a look at it. Is this something that is important? Things like mental health care. 55% of people who have an intellectual or developmental disability also have some sort of mental health disability as well, something else that's impacting their lives. There are resources out there for those individuals. There are resources that you may need to access. So again, that's on our checklist just to make you think, oh, hey, have I taken advantage of this? And it's also something, again, we encourage you to share with other families, because, one of the things we hate is when somebody comes in and says, no one ever told me. I had no idea I needed to do these things. And sometimes we assume that our special education teachers know all of these pieces, but their focus is right now. They know what their educational component is, and they don't always know enough about why you need to apply early. And so we've shared these checklists with the schools. There's several school districts that do have these on their websites, but it isn't always put into a family's hands. And so we encourage people, if you have it, share it with somebody else. Don't assume that somebody else knows, because we would hate for somebody to be struggling when there are supports there.
Yeah, I love that. I think, you touched on support for parents and siblings and family members, and that is so crucial. I remember you spoke on our panel at our family weekend conference. Quick plug, we do have family weekend conference, and that would actually be a great opportunity to meet with other families and spend the whole weekend with other families who have a child or adult with intellectual or developmental disabilities. So check out our website. I'll link that. But you spoke on that panel, and I remember one of the anonymous questions that was sent in. Parents could send in questions ahead of time, but it was about how to handle the transition that the parent was going through. And they kind of said, like, all my friends are empty nesters and I am not. And I am struggling because there's this piece of my life that I no longer am in the same place as my friends. And it's something I don't have someone to talk to. And we kind of talked about it that day about, it's time to make sure you build some community, and, you can do that through the different agencies. When you are, bringing your child or adult to programs, talk to those other parents or guardians. UGM, we are rolling out some new programs in 2025 that are really going to foster community, especially for those who love Jesus and love people with disabilities. But there are those programs out there. And so, I would highly, highly encourage to take some care for yourself too, mom, dad, guardian, and make sure that you feel like you're supported and have resources, because we know that you are constantly thinking about your child and doing everything you can to support them. But part of the way you can support them is by finding support for yourself. So, well, thank you so much for coming on here. In the show notes, I will link the website to AbilityPoint, so you can check out the programs they have. They do have targeted case management as well. And I'll also link that transition checklist so that those are readily available. And of course, you can check out unstoppablegodministries.org for our programs and everything that we've got coming up in this next year. Dad, thanks for raising me. Thanks for introducing me to my best friends. But also thank you for just everything you're doing with AbilityPoint and just the way that you love people. I tell people all the time, it just was modeled for me. And so, of course, I followed in your footsteps, because I know how you love people, and I want to love people like that. And so thanks for being a role model and a professional that I can call and put on my podcast. So.
Well, thank you. You far outseated anything that I could do when it comes to being able to reach the community. So keep up the great work.
All right. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. It just helps make sure that our video is shown to more people who may need this as a resource. Also, comment what your favorite part was, comment any questions you have, and we'll see you next week.